Alrighty, everyone. It is May 12th, 2025. I am Michael Winkler, and this is the Mike Wink Show. So we're going to hop right into it with some crazy corruption story involving Trump. I saw a headline just yesterday or the day before talking about Trump receiving a 747 jet as a gift from Qatar and that he's going to make it the Air Force One plane or so yeah, 747 jet. Gift. Crazy, right? All right, let's see where this goes. Trump administration poised to accept Palace in the Sky as a gift for Trump from Qatar. In what may be the most valuable gift ever extended to the United States from a foreign government, the Trump administration is preparing to accept a super luxury Boeing 747-8 jumbo jet from the royal family of Qatar, a gift that is to be available for use by President Donald Trump as the new Air Force One until shortly before he leaves office, at which time ownership of the plane will be transferred to the Trump Presidential Library Foundation. Sources familiar with the proposed arrangement told ABC News. Wow, I can't think of a bigger security concern than accepting a freaking airplane and then making that Air Force One from Qatar. How could the amount of work it would take to comb over that plane and ensure there's no surveillance devices or whatever, the amount of work it would take is insane. I can't even imagine it. The gift has been expected to be announced next week when Trump visits Qatar on the first foreign trip of his second term, according to sources familiar with the plans. But a senior White House official said the gift will not be presented or gifted while the president is in Qatar this week. In a social media post Sunday night, Trump confirmed his administration was preparing to accept the aircraft, calling it a very public and transparent transaction with the Defense Department. Trump had previously toured the plane, which is so opulently configured it is known as a flying palace, while it was parked in the West Palm Beach International Airport in February. The highly unusual, unprecedented arrangement is sure to raise questions about whether it is legal for the Trump administration and ultimately the Trump Presidential Library Foundation to accept such a valuable gift from a foreign power. Yeah, there has to be some weird legal. I, it it seems to me on the surface legally dubious that he's able to accept it as a gift, make it like the official federal government Air Force One plane, and then when he leaves, just be like, "Yeah, I'm taking this with me," like it's the mints at a restaurant on the way out. He's just like, "Yeah, I'm just gonna take this with me." I don't know how that legally all works. It seems very strange to me. I guess maybe president is allowed to use their own personal plane. Maybe that makes sense. I guess. Hmm. That actually doesn't make sense now that I think about it, because the president is actually fairly restricted on what he's allowed to do. For security concerns. So I don't know. It's a weird one. Anticipating those questions, sources told ABC News that lawyers for the White House counsel's office and the Department of Justice drafted an analysis for Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, concluding that is legal for the Department of Defense to accept the aircraft as a gift and later turn it over to the Trump Library, and that it does not violate laws against bribery or the Constitution's prohibition, the Emoluments Clause, of any U.S. government official accepting gifts from any king, prince, or foreign state. How does it not wait? If we have a rule that says that explicitly says you cannot accept gifts or bribes from kings, princes, or foreign states, isn't this literally exactly what that is? How could you possibly parse this out between being a gift and something else? Sources told ABC News that Attorney General Pam Bondi and Trump's top White House lawyer David Warrington concluded it would be legally permissible for the donation of the aircraft to be conditioned on transferring its ownership to Trump's presidential library before the end of his term, according to sources familiar with their determination. The sources said Bondi provided a legal memorandum addressed to the White House counsel's office last week after Warrington asked for her advice on the legality of the Pentagon accepting such a donation. White House Secretary Caroline Leavitt said in a statement to ABC News, any gift given by a foreign government is always accepted in full compliance with all applicable laws. President Trump's administration is committed to full transparency, Levitt added. Ali Al Ansari, Qatar's media attaché, said in a statement that the transfer of an aircraft for temporary use as Air Force One is currently under. Ooh, I think that's a typo. Ali Ansari, Qatar's media attaché, said in a statement that the transfer of an aircraft for temporary use as Air Force One is current under consideration by Qatar's Ministry of Defense and the U.S. Department of Defense. Is currently. Okay, there's a and typo on this ABC News article. The plane will initially be transferred to the United States Air Force, which will modify the 13-year-old aircraft to meet the U.S. military's specifications required for any aircraft used to transport the President of the United States, multiple sources familiar with the proposed arrangement said. Plane will then be transferred to the Trump Presidential Library Foundation no later than January 1st, 2029, and any costs relating to its transfer will be paid for by the U.S. Air Force, the sources told ABC News. Okay, yeah, this is where I get even more. This is where this seems to get even more legally dubious. Is like they're able to use those funds, like taxpayer dollars, to do this. That seems so weird. I could understand this being legal in some scenario in which it's like the president provides the plane for himself, like he pays for the transfer, like all of that stuff is handled by him. That maybe would make sense to me that it's allowed. But the fact that he's allowed to accept it and then use taxpayer money to transfer it back to himself seems very weird. And the fact that they're saying it's legally allowed makes me go, is it really? Is it really? Because you can't trust anything this administration says about anything. So if they're arguing that it's legally allowed, it's almost certainly not. They're trying to bury the lead. They're trying to, I don't know, speak it into existence. According to aviation industry experts, the estimated value of the aircraft Trump will inherit is about $400 million, and that's without the additional communications security equipment the Air Force will need to add to properly secure and outfit the plane in order to safely transport the commander-in-chief. As the Wall Street Journal first reported, the aviation company L3Harris has already been commissioned to overhaul the plane to meet the requirements of a presidential jet. In his social media post, who's paying for all of this? It'd be really funny if like the cost of doing all of this is more than if they just like commissioned this same exact plane from the start. It'd be really funny. In his social media post, Trump claimed Democrats are insisting the administration pay top dollar for the aircraft rather than receive it for free. Following ABC News reporting, Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer said via social media, "Nothing says America first like Air Force One, brought to you by Qatar. It's not just bribery, it's premium foreign influence with extra legroom." While while Senator Adam Schiff, Democrat from California, cited the Constitution's no title of nobility clause, writing, "The corruption is brazen." Both the White House and the DOJ concluded that because the gift is not conditioned on any official act, it does not constitute bribery, the sources said. Okay, so they're arguing because there's no explicit quid pro quo, it can't be bribery? Like, if that is I don't think that is the official legal standard to prove bribery in this context. And if it is, then that clause in the Constitution may not even fucking exist because it would be practically impossible to prove. What idiot would do an explicit bribe like that, and have a quid pro quo people could find? There's no way. Nobody's that stupid. Bondi Bondi's legal analysis also says it does not run afoul of the Constitution's prohibition on foreign gifts because the plane is not being given to an individual, but rather to the United States Air Force and eventually to the Presidential Library Foundation, the sources said. What is the Presidential Library Foundation? Hold on, let me Google it. Presidential Library Foundations are nonprofit organizations that support the construction and operation of presidential libraries, which are museums and research centers dedicated to the preservation and study of presidential history. These foundations, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so they're non-governmental entities. They're non-profits. Okay, so why would they transfer it to the... I feel like the whole transferring it to the Presidential Library Foundation sort of undermines his argument. His basic The Democrats are like, this is corruption. And his counter argument is basically, it's a free plane, guys. Why would we not take it? Are you silly? Why would we not take this? Okay. Which in a vacuum sounds reasonable. Okay. But I feel like that point is completely undermined by the fact that he wants to have it transferred away from Air Force One to the Presidential Library Foundation, specifically as by what they were saying, his Presidential Library Foundation, at the end of his term. And I would think if I'm gonna actually run with his argument that it's a free plane, guys, and why would we not accept it, even if it's Qatar, um, he would want to. It would remain an Air Force One, right? It would be an asset they're like really like, and they're going to keep in circulation for the next president, and maybe the next one, the next one. Why would they transfer it over after I'm done? I feel like that undermines the point he's trying to make. The primary aircraft used in the current Air Force One fleet includes two aging Boeing 747-200 jumbo jets that have been operational since 1990. The Air Force contract with Boeing to replace those aircrafts has been riddled with delays and cost overruns. The original contract was signed in 2018, but as of last year, Boeing anticipated the aircraft would not be ready until 2029 after Trump leaves office. The president has expressed deep frustration with the delays, tasking Elon Musk to work with Boeing and the Air Force to speed up the process. Those efforts have been modestly successful. Boeing's most recent estimated delivery date is now 2027, but Trump has made it clear he wants a new plane this year. I want my plane. I don't want it now. All right, let's read another article about this. Trump blasts Democratic criticism of Qatar plane gift, world-class leaders. Let's hope this article gives us a little bit more info on this. President Trump attacked Democratic lawmakers for criticizing his upcoming receipt of a luxury Boeing jet from Qatar. Bro, just imagine if Biden did this during his term. Trump would lose his fucking mind, okay? All the Republicans would lose their mind if Harris was elected and then she did this, right? Such an extreme double standard. In a Sunday night post on Truth Social, the president dismissed critics of a reported plan for him to receive a Boeing 747-8 airplane from the government of Qatar. Plane would replace Air Force One, according to several media reports, and would be kept by Trump's eventual presidential library after the end of his term. What the heck was a presidential library need with a 747 jet? While the White House did not confirm details about the transaction Sunday, the president confirmed the Defense Department would receive the gifted plane. I have to do it in his voice. So the fact that the Defense Department is getting a gift, free of charge, of a 747 airplane to replace the 40-year-old Air Force One temporarily in a very public and transparent transaction so bothers the crooked Democrats that they insist we pay top dollar for the plane. Anybody can do that. The Dems are world-class losers. MAGA, Trump wrote. It's just I literally cannot read something he's written without laughing afterwards. It's just so silly. I just like we're so deep. We're how many years into Trump now? We're what? 10 years into him dominating politics. And I still can't get over just how ridiculous the transcriptions of what he says are are. ABC News first reported the pending plane deal ahead of Trump's visit this week to several Middle Eastern nations, including Qatar. Qatari officials told The Hill the plane would not be given to Trump during the trip. In a statement to News Nation earlier Sunday, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt did not confirm the specifics of the deal, but said, any gift given by a foreign government is always accepted in full compliance with all applicable laws. President Trump's administration is committed to full transparency. The report of the gifted plane sparked criticism from Democratic lawmakers who called it another example of Trump using the presidency to enrich himself. Representative Jamie Raskin, ranking member of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee, called the reported deal a grift. Trump must seek Congress's consent to take this $300 million gift from Qatar. The Constitution is perfectly clear. No present of any kind whatsoever from a foreign state without congressional permission. A gift you use for A gift you use for 4 years and then deposit in your library is still a gift and a grift, Raskin wrote in a post on the social platform X. Senator Chris Murphy said in a post before Trump's own remarks that even if it's not a done deal yet, the fact giving Trump a jet is under consideration tells you all you need to know about what countries are being told they need to do to be an ally with America under Trump. It'd be so funny. I'm just imagining Trump now just like going country to country shopping around who's going to give him an airplane now. That's just a really funny thought. He's just like, well, I don't know, Qatar. The Swedes are offering me a nice 737. I know you offered a 727, but they're saying a 737. Maybe you could add a couple numbers, make it a 747. That would go a long way with me. I do love a good airplane. It's so ridiculous. I just this is like one of the biggest examples of the double standard I can think of. Just imagine for 5.5 seconds Biden did this. Just imagine. Trump and the Republicans would lose their minds. They'd lose their minds. And it would be impossible to convince them that it's fine. Imagine them losing their minds about this, and then you tried to ease their concerns. Oh, don't worry, guys. Uh, uh, we needed a new plane anyways, and it's free, and you'd be stupid to not take it. Imagine if that was Biden's response to that. I just, it's just so ridiculous. And I think this is where there's a legitimate difference in integrity between the Republicans and Democrats on this instance. It's not like one side has integrity and the other doesn't. Okay, we're talking about degrees here. I think they both are, tracking towards lacking integrity, and there's a lot of people on both sides that are willing to lie. But I think the propensity and willingness of the Republicans to just overlook things to such a hypocritical level, it's unbelievable, is not comparable to the Democratic side. The Democrats would at least have some of their people calling this out, saying this is crazy, guys. We're just gonna stay quiet and defend this. The Republicans are unwilling to have that that moment of self-reflection whatsoever. They're just full on like whatever Daddy Trump does, and is fine. And if we disagree with it, we're either going to keep our mouth shut or we're just going to straight up lie and grift our way into coming up with some convoluted reason that it's fine. This is just so like I could care less about a one airplane. Okay. This is one of those things where it's like, this isn't that substantive. And this kind of a story is ultimately a big distraction. Yes, it is a sign of rank corruption, of course. And it is a sign of the hilarious double standard that would be held if Biden or any Democrat did this exact same thing. But ultimately, this is just like not a very significant story. I mean, it's an airplane. Like, really, at the end of the day, who gives a shit? Like, I don't. It's just I don't know. It's just this is one of those frustrating nothing stories. There isn't a whole lot of substance, but it's very frustrating to discuss and to put in the context of our greater political environment right now. All right, let's move on. Oh, good old Pete Whiskey Leaks Hegseth. Oh, Whiskey Leaks. I love that. I love that nickname for him. It's so good. Whiskey Leaks. I love it. I stole that from Kyle Kalinske. I'm not gonna lie. U.S. to begin immediate removal of up to 1,000 trans military members. So I'm pretty sure. So they're trying to implement a trans military ban. I'm pretty sure they did this during his first administration, if I remember correctly. I don't know if this is the exact same one or if it's like an expanded version of it or whatever. Um, but the way I heard about this actually was within the context of retirement. So apparently they are basically just kicking out people who identify as trans. Anybody they've just determined they are not eligible to continue to serve in the military, which is a big problem, I think, where it's especially a problem is those getting close to retirement. So there are a number of trans military members that are at the 14, 15, 16, 17-year mark of service. Now, in the military, we have a program called the Temporary Early Retirement Authority. This is a program that allows military members to retire before completing a full 20 years of active duty service, typically somewhere between 15 and 20 years. I think the standardized number at this point is 18 years. That's the number I was hearing within the context of this story. So most people are eligible to receive the temporary early retirement authority retirement benefits 2 years earlier than they typically would at the 18-year mark. But regardless if it's at 18 years or 20 years, the point is that these people have been in the service for a long time expecting to receive these benefits, just like you would in the private sector, right? People work at jobs for long times to receive retirement benefits, to build up their 401k, to receive pensions. Um, Lots of companies have severance packages or that require a minimum amount of years served, and lots of companies have retirement clauses where it's basically like, you reach the 10, 15, 20-year mark, we offer these sorts of packages for you to retire, and we offer these benefits, and yada, yada, yada. It is a very standard part of our modern 21st century society to to work towards an explicit retirement. Okay, that's what this is, and I don't think it's any different than what would occur in the private sector. And so anybody who's been serving in the military like this and been meeting their duties and hasn't been kicked out for whatever reason and is at the 14, 15, 16, 17-year mark and is only a couple of years away from retirement, it would be a travesty to kick them out of the military right before that threshold. So they spent all this time serving our country and then are unable to receive retirement benefits just a year short of it because this administration has a vendetta against trans people. It's so sick. It's just like, even if you want to try and kick trans people out of the military, there's absolutely no defense for these people that are falling just short of retirement. There's just no defense. The Pentagon is removing the 1,000 members of the military who openly identify as trans and giving those who have yet to openly identify as transgender 30 days to remove themselves, according to a new directive issued on Thursday. The memo is fueled by Tuesday's Supreme Court decision allowing the Trump administration to enforce a ban on trans military members. The Defense Department has said it will follow up by going through medical records to identify others who have not yet come forward. I'm going to read this really quick, this side article. The Trump administration can begin to enforce a ban on transgender troops serving in the military while a challenge to the policy plays out in the courts. The Supreme Court ruled on Tuesday, a significant decision that could lead to the discharge of thousands of military members. The court's order was unsigned and gave no explanation for its reasoning, which is typical of decisions the justices reach on an emergency basis. The court's three liberal members, Sonia Sotomayor, Elena Kagan, and Ketanji Brown Jackson, all noted their dissent from the decision. Lambda Legal and the Human Rights Campaign Foundation, which represented challengers in the case, called the decision a devastating blow to transgender service members. By allowing this discriminatory ban to take effect while our challenge continues, the court has temporarily sanctioned a policy that has nothing to do with military readiness and everything to do with prejudice, the group said in a statement. Transgender individuals meet the same standards and demonstrate the same values as all who serve. We remain steadfast in our belief that this ban violates constitutional protection and will ultimately be struck down. Oh, ye of little faith. Have they not, whoever wrote this, do you not know the makeup of the? Are you kidding me? And you think it will ultimately be struck down? Yeah, maybe in like 40 years it'll be struck down. Are you crazy? Immediately after coming into office, Donald Trump rescinded an executive order from the Biden administration that allowed transgender people to serve openly in the military. On January 27th, the president issued a second executive order that said transgender people could not serve in the military. It is the policy of the United States government to establish high standards for troop readiness, lethality, cohesion, honesty, humility, uniformity, and integrity, the order said. This policy is inconsistent with the medical, surgical, and mental health constraints on individuals with gender dysphoria. This policy is also inconsistent with shifting pronoun usage or use of pronouns that inaccurately reflect an individual's sex. The Defense Department began implementing the ban at the end of February. This is just such a weird. I feel like this exact same reasoning can be used to keep women out of the military. And I think a lot of the same people that are against trans people in the military are against women in the military, I would imagine, because they're just they're not as physically strong as men. They're not as able-bodied or whatever the weird reasoning is, even though like the way the military works is like they have a threshold of like physical ability and readiness and training and all that stuff. And you have to get above that threshold, right? There isn't a different threshold for men and women as far as I understand. It's the same. It's basically the same threshold. Or if it is different, it's proportional. Like it's proportionalized to the different genders. But also, like, it's 2025. How much does like your ability to bench press 400 pounds really like an important part of war? Like, I understand it's important, and you want your your military members to be strong and able to have like a physical hand-to-hand combat situation. Sure, but like 99%, I would imagine, of what the army does, even in a fighting scenario, it does not necessitate being able to bench press 400 pounds. It's just a very strange, like, it, there's just no like real. As soon as you start to break down their argument even a little bit, it falls apart immediately because there's just no like. You would have to prove all this statistically, and I don't think they could prove any of this statistically, as far as I understand it. A Defense Department estimate from earlier this year said there were roughly 4,200 people in the military with a diagnosis of gender dysphoria, roughly 0.2% of the 2 million people currently serving. 7 transgender service members and 1 transgender person who would like to join the military challenged the ban. Lawyers from the lead plaintiff, Navy pilot Emily Schilling, said the military had spent $20 million on her training, according to SCOTUS blog. Yeah, this is just like, even if we run with their argument to the fullest extent, right? So these transgender military members have like HRT, and they might have like I think testosterone needs to be kept cold, so maybe you'd need like a small cooler or some way to keep the like medication cold when you're like out in the field or whatever. Let's pretend for a second like this is the case. And for some maybe it is the case. Um it's 2025, right? Is it really difficult to do any of that? No. Is it really expensive to do any of that? No. And within the context of the $20 million we spent training this military fighter jet pilot, we aren't willing to spend that little bit extra to support their their medical needs. It just seems so like it's like cutting off your nose to spite your face. It's just so short-sighted and stupid. Several lower courts had halted the ban. The case before the Supreme Court involved a ruling from U.S. District Court Judge Benjamin Settle, who blocked the ban in March. The government's arguments are not persuasive, and it is not an especially close question on this record, Settle, an appointment of George W. Bush, wrote at the time. The government's unrelenting reliance on deference to military judgment is unjustified in the absence of any evidence supporting the military's new judgment reflected in the military ban. Ooh, that's such a weird sentence. What is he saying there? Basically, he's saying typically we defer to the military to make these sorts of decisions, but the fact that they're not providing any actual evidence to support their reasoning means that we basically should not defer to them, and that there's no like it is not a rule that we defer to them. And to the extent that we have the ability and we should restrict that deference, this is an example of that because they're just making this decision with absolutely no reasoning given. And he's also arguing, I think, that the government's arguments are not persuasive, and it is not an especially close question on this record. To me, that also says he's furthermore taking another step forward and saying, I don't think that even if you did try and present an argument, I don't think there really is much of an argument here. At least it seems like that's what the judge is trying to say. Another judge, Anna Reyes of the U.S. District Court in Washington, D.C., also blocked the ban, saying it was soaked with animus and dripping with pretext. The Trump administration asked the Supreme Court to intervene last month. The district court issued a universal injunction usurping the executive branch's authority to determine who may serve in the nation's armed forces, John Sauer, the U.S. Solicitor General, wrote in a brief to the court. Trump's ban is broader than a similar policy enacted during his first term. Okay, so that answers my question from before. So it isn't the exact same one. It is an expanded version of the prior military ban or trans-military ban from his first term. The previous policy allowed those who had come out before the ban to continue to serve in the military. The more recent policy affects nearly all active service serving transgender members. Pausing, yeah, so the first one, if I'm gonna like give them, they don't deserve benefit of the doubt, but if I'm gonna try and give them the benefit of the doubt, the first ban seems like it makes so much more sense, right? You keep the people you've spent $20 million training to be a military pilot in, and you spend the extra $100 a month on their HRT or whatever the fuck it is, um, instead of just kicking them all out for seemingly no good reason. Pausing the order, Schilling's lawyers said would upend the status quo by allowing the government to immediately begin discharging thousands of transgender service members, thereby ending distinguished careers and gouging holes in military units. A majority of Americans support allowing transgender people to serve in the military, according to a February Gallup poll. However, there is a sharp partisan split. While 84% of Democrats favor such a policy, only 23% of Republicans do. I don't understand what is like the actual good faith reasoning for why trans people should not be allowed in the military. The military readiness argument completely falls apart as soon as you understand how the military goes about like establishing and like grading and certifying military readiness. Once you understand anything about that process, like if you don't even need to know about it. Once you think about it for 5.5 seconds, you realize that this doesn't make sense. And that such a broad policy, like they literally go case by case. That is their whole thing. They train people case by case. You will be discharged from boot camp or you will be kicked out if you're unable to meet their thresholds and do their standards and do what they ask you to do. Like it's not like this isn't like affirmative action for trans people in the military. It's just so I cannot even conceive of a good faith argument for why you wouldn't allow it. I can't. All right, let's go back to the main article. Officials have said that as of December 9th, 2024, there were 4,240 troops diagnosed with gender dysphoria in active duty, National Guard, and Reserve Service, representing a tiny fraction of the 2 million people in service, although they acknowledge the number may be higher. The memo released on Thursday mirrors one sent out on Friday, but any action was stalled at that point by several lawsuits. When the initial Pentagon directive came out earlier this year, it gave service members 30 days to self-identify. Since then, about 1,000 have done so. This is so, like, did they trick them? It seems like they might have tricked them. Because, like, who would come forward that they have gender dysphoria or that they feel like they're trans or whatever, in the face of potentially being kicked out? Because you're trans. That doesn't make sense to me. That makes me think that maybe they were like, didn't tell them what they were going to do, but like sort of implied like, oh, if you just come forward and tell us that you're trans, like, oh, we'll be good. Like transparency is what we want, man. Like just be truthful with us and we'll work with you sort of thing. I question whether they did that. And then once they have all the people who came forward in good faith, then they're going to act in bad faith and use that information they came forward and gave in good faith to pick them out of the military. In a statement, a Pentagon spokesperson, Sean Parnell, said the 1,000 troops who already self-identified will begin the voluntary separation process from the military. Ray Timberlake, a spokesperson for Sparta Pride, is one of the 1,000 who chose to self-identify. Timberlake has served in the Navy for 17 years and said that trans service members who do not take the current buyout offer could lose out on benefits that took years of service to build. There's no guarantee to access to your pension or severance or an honorable discharge, Timberlake said. Despite Timberlake's decision to leave, they said many trans troops would continue. It says trans service members who do not take the current buyout offer. Buyout offer. See if I can find more information on that. I don't think I'm going to be able to find more information on the buyout offer. So I guess to some extent they're offering a buyout offer, but I'm not exactly sure what, and it seems like nobody has any information on the details of that buyout offer. This is the only place I've seen it referenced is a buyout offer. Maybe it's just hopeful. Maybe they're just hoping they give them some sort of buyout offer. I don't know. There's no guarantee to access your pension or service or severance as an honorable discharge, Timberlake said. Okay, so I guess you get severance as an I didn't know that. So if you get honorably discharged from the military, I guess you are eligible to receive some sort of severance or a pension and or a pension. But I guess they are not allowing them to do this. Despite Timberlake's decision to leave, they said many trans troops would continue serving if allowed to. This is not voluntary. This is a decision that folks are coming to under duress, Timberlake said. These are 1,000 transgender troops that would be serving if the conditions were not created to force them into making a decision for their own well-being or the well-being of their family long term. The move is the latest by the Trump administration taking aim at trans members of the military and trans veterans. After Trump took office and issued a flurry of gender focused executive orders, the Department of Veterans Affairs started cracking down on healthcare for LGBTQ plus veterans, starting with the rescinding of VA Directive 1341, thereby phasing out treatments for gender dysphoria. This is so like antithetical to the culture that the military, as far as I understand, has worked really hard over the last few decades to try and like cultivate. They've tried to cultivate a culture of honesty, of being open, of like trying to cut down on things like hazing. To they moved past um, don't ask, don't tell for gay service members. They've been working really, really hard to change the culture of the military for a number of decades. And I think this completely undermines that. The only reason you have trans service members at all is because you've cultivated this culture of trust and they're willing to trust you with that information and also expect to receive a very reasonable amount of like healthcare it's as a result. The expulsion of trans service members comes in tandem with the past views of the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, that women are not suited for combat roles at a time when military recruitment is profoundly struggling and veterans have voiced concerns that potential Veterans Administration cuts could further hinder young Americans from enlisting. This lines up perfectly with what I said earlier. The exact same kind of people that are making like a a completely devoid from logic argument that trans people should not be allowed in the military would probably make like the same exact argument would apply for women too, women compared to men. So the same people that would be against women or against trans people in the military would be against women in the military. I would expect that. This is entirely consistent with that. Pete WhiskeyLeaks Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense himself, has that viewpoint. Announcing the removals on Thursday, Hegseth doubled down on his hardline approach. We are leaving wokeness and weakness behind. No more pronouns, Hegseth wrote in a post on X on Thursday. We are done with that shit. It's so weird that they say that because pronouns are like, it's part of grammar, right? Like, I mean, he, she, they, them, these are things we use in everyday life, right? So for him to say, like, they could make it sound so much more logical. They could just say something like, um, no incorrect no more incorrect pronouns or no more fake pronouns or no more. There are ways that he could qualify what he's saying to make it not sound so stupid. So like like just so like banging rocks together stupid, right? This is what it this he's not mad at pronouns, he's mad at the way people are using the way certain people are using pronouns is what he's mad at. He's not mad at pronouns. It's just so it's just so stupid. All right, I don't know if there's a whole lot more to say about that. It's just like a complete abdication of the work they've done for the last number of decades. It's Trump is like just stomping on the work the military has done to try and change the culture over the last number of decades. This culture of trust, and the trust element I'm really emphasizing is really hurt by this because people now know in the military I cannot trust the military with my own private medical records. I don't know what they're going to do with it. I don't know if they're going to use it against me in a cynical, bad faith manner. And this is really bad. It's not a good look. Not a good look and completely illogical. Alrighty. So, we'll cover this one pretty quickly. It seems like my prediction for it's still a little too early to say for certain, but I'd say 90% it looks like my prediction was correct that this little conflict between India and Pakistan is just going to end up being a footnote in history. They do this every couple of years, every decade or so it seems like, where they have a little spat, few planes get shot down, few missiles get shot, few artillery, some artillery gets shot, maybe 100 people die, and it just sort of fizzles out and it goes back to business as usual, and it is what it is. Um, uh, that was my prediction of what would come of this whole India Pakistan thing, and it seems like um, I'm right so far. From missiles to ceasefire, how India and Pakistan pulled back from the brink. India's surface-to-air missiles were already soaring towards Pakistan's most significant military bases when the first call came from the U.S. It was 4 a.m. in Islamabad, and Marco Rubio, the U.S. Secretary of State and recently appointed U.S. National Security Advisor, was on the line to the man everyone knew was calling the shots in Pakistan, Army Chief General Asim Munir. Okay, hold on. I'm already skeptical about how this article is going to frame the situation because my understanding is that the Trump administration tried to come out and insert themselves in the middle of this and claim that they played a role in brokering a peace agreement. But then India themselves came out like the next day and was basically like, no, don't listen to them. They had no hand in this. So I'm going to read this article, but if this article tries to frame it as if the Trump administration had some sort of hand in this, I am going to then do some research to show if it's true or not. If all of this was actually correct. It was the beginning of 8 hours of negotiations mediated by the U.S. that finally secured a fragile ceasefire between India and Pakistan at midday on Saturday, according to two Pakistan security and intelligence officials who spoke to The Guardian. The agreement was first publicly announced by President Donald Trump on his Truth Social platform, although Pakistan said the U.S. president never personally made any calls to their side during the negotiations. Okay, yeah, so that is it Pakistan that said that they had no role in this? So Pakistan is claiming that the US has no role in this. So at least one part of the equation is claiming that. When India first launched missiles at Pakistan early on Wednesday as retribution for a military in India administered Kashmir in April that killed 26 people, the US showed little interest in getting involved. The US had the right to defend itself after the Kashmir attack. The India blah blah blah. The US had already said India had the right to defend itself after the Kashmir attack, and India framed its strikes on Pakistan as solely hitting terrorist camps and threatened its national security rather than any civilian or military targets. Asked in the Oval Office that day about the escalating tensions between India and Pakistan, Trump said dismissively, "They've been fighting for a long time. I just hope it ends very quickly." Speaking on Thursday, his Vice President J.D. Vance said simply it was none of our business. But by late Friday night, as both sides escalated the conflict, it was made clear to the Trump administration that leaving the two nuclear-armed countries to their own devices posed a danger not just to the region but to the world, and that the only third-party mediator acceptable to both sides was the U.S., as it has historically been for decades. In particular, the U.S. began to fear the escalation towards a nuclear threat was becoming a very real possibility. This threat was seen to escalate. This threat was seen to escalate further after India launched strikes at three critical Pakistani air bases, including Nur Khan Air Base in the city of Rawalpindi in the early hours of Saturday. An attack said to be an attempt to preempt an imminent strike by Pakistan. Headquarters of the army and military wing who safeguard Pakistan's nuclear weapons are based in Rawalpindi. The army chief and the prime minister, Shehbaz Sharif, were so concerned that the PM called for a meeting of the National Command Authority, the body in control of Pakistan's nuclear capabilities. Pakistan later denied ever calling the meeting. At this point, the fear for everyone was a nuclear war between two arch rivals, said one Pakistan security official, something Trump referenced on Monday when he boasted on his Truth social media network that he had prevented a bad nuclear war between two countries. Trump had tasked Rubio with talking down the Pakistan side, while Vance was the one dealing directly with India and its Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Rubio made repeated calls not only to Munir, the army chief, but also Pakistan's national security advisor, Asim Malik, and Sharif. According to officials, the message from Rubio was simple: this needs to stop. Interventions were also made by Saudi Arabia, Iran, and the UAE, and the UK also applied pressure through diplomatic back channels. We welcomed the U.S. intervention, said one Pakistan official. We don't want war, but if it is imposed upon us, then we will have no choice to respond with aggression as we did. India has since maintained that their fight was only with terrorists and that it was a shame that the Pakistan military chose to intervene. By 2:30 p.m. on Saturday, the heads of both Pakistan and India's military operations spoke on the phone for the first time since hostilities broke out. Initially, they agreed for the ceasefire to begin at 4 p.m., but after reports of cross-border firing and drones along the disputed border in Kashmir, known as the Line of Control, it was pushed back. As well as an end to all aggressions, the ceasefire included an agreement for future truce talks to take place between the two countries, likely in one of the Gulf states such as the UAE, according to officials. Anwar ul-Haq Qatar, the former prime minister of Pakistan, who has been privy to high-level discussions, said the talks would primarily focus on securing the ceasefire and discussions on India's ongoing suspension of the Indus River Treaty, which governs critical water flow into Pakistan. Immediately, Kashmir issue might not be discussed, but after some confidence-building measures, the issue of Kashmir will be on the table, said Kakar. While Pakistan openly discussed the U.S. role in brokering peace, while Pakistan openly discussed the U.S. role in brokering peace, Sharif publicly thanking Trump for his involvement, India made no mention at all of any outside influence in the agreement, instead later claiming it was Pakistan who had first approached them for a ceasefire. Indian officials, yeah, that's my understanding, was that basically they tried to act like they did something, and like the fact that you have diplomatic contact between the US and India and Pakistan does not mean anything in and of itself. That does not mean that you're trying to, like, that you brokered the deal, or the fact that you were talking to them about the conflict at all does not mean that you're like the chief negotiator or something. That's just ridiculous. It's the classic Trump playbook to pretend like he's doing something when he's not. Indian officials did not respond to requests by The Guardian to discuss the ceasefire negotiations. However, analysts said India's refusal to discuss any U.S. role in a ceasefire was indicative of the Modi government's non-alignment foreign policy and its bullish rejection of outside interference in India's affairs. On Sunday, Trump, who seemed to have discovered a newfound interest in the subcontinent, tweeted that he was willing to work with India to see if, after 1,000 years, a solution can be arrived at concerning Kashmir. India and Pakistan's dispute over Kashmir dates back not thousands of years, but instead to 1947, after the partition of India and the formation of Pakistan. The two countries have since fought 3 wars over the region, which remain divided between both. Indian-administered Kashmir is home to a decades-long violent insurgency said to be backed and funded by Pakistan and is one of the most militarized zones in the world. India has historically rejected third-party mediation on Kashmir, viewing it as a sovereign issue, and remains highly sensitive to any discussion over it at an international level. Interesting. So basically, this aligns with my understanding of how things played out. That for the most part, the ceasefire went off, and that the Trump administration tried to claim some. Yeah, my understanding is they tried to claim some credit for all of this, and that they really the amount of credit that they're owed in this is very questionable. And with their track record of lying about stuff and claiming that they've done stuff when they haven't, and yada yada yada, I think it is totally reasonable for me to just be like, yeah, I believe India and Pakistan on this one, and I have no faith that the Trump administration is telling the truth. Okay, so I heard that there was an executive order that President Trump signed a couple of days ago, or maybe a week ago or so, um, directing the government to double the ICE force. I think there was something like 20 or 30,000 ICE agents, and that they were doubling that number to 40 or 60 or whatever doubling it would be. I tried to look for an article on this, and in doing so, I found this statement from the official whitehouse.gov about Project Homecoming. This was released 3 days ago. I had not heard about this. Um, I'm interested to hear just how the this is straight from the horse's mouth. So this has to be this is true unfiltered cowboy killer lunacy. Let's see how this is. Oh, this is one of those things where I think it's going to be embarrassing to read, and I really hope people don't see me reading this out of context. Over the last 4 years, the United States has endured a full-scale invasion of aliens entering and remaining in the country illegally, causing a relentless onslaught of crime, vagrancy, violence, and death in countless American communities. This lawless invasion has also limited the capacity of American schools and hospitals to provide for American citizens and has diverted billions of dollars in federal, state, and local social services from Americans in need. Okay, pause for a second. My understanding is that basically all federal, state, and local social services are not you if you don't have a social security number or you're not a registered American citizen, you do not have eligibility to receive any of these benefits, especially on the federal and state levels. I know some local municipalities and cities and whatnot have special programs unique to them, acknowledging we have a large population of illegals and we know they can't access these essential services that would help them out a lot because they don't have a social security number or a for citizenship. So we're going to establish our own little internal program to help support these people in some kind of way. There are some examples of that, but like those are choices. Those are local choices made within the city themselves. And also, he mentions this lawless invasion has also limited the capacity of American schools and hospitals to provide for American citizens. The American schools one, I guess you could make some real argument there because illegal children still can go to school, as far as I understand, and they can receive those benefits. Let's put aside the fact that they pay taxes or whatever, but let's put that aside, okay? Hospitals are not run by the government. I know there are some hospitals that are government run, I guess, but my understanding is they're mostly municipal, and that we don't have any like universal healthcare system or anything even close to it. And so to make this sort of collectivized argument in an inherently uncollectivized system doesn't make sense to me. The continued presence of illegal aliens in our nation forces American taxpayers to bear a tremendous fiscal burden to support them, including through costs related to healthcare, food stamps, public housing, emergency medical services, education, and shelter, as well as the costs of crimes committed by illegal aliens. My understanding is that they aren't eligible for almost any of that. And they pay taxes. They still have to pay taxes, right? They pay sales tax, they pay property tax, they pay basically all the taxes a normal citizen would, and they're not eligible to receive the benefits. My understanding is that illegals who are working and paying taxes in that capacity are actually a benefit to society in the sense that they pay them in more than they're like costing, more than they're taking out. In fiscal year 2023 alone, these costs were estimated to exceed $150 billion in taxpayer dollars. Removal flights of illegal aliens are a necessary aspect of immigration enforcement and upholding the rule of law, but they require substantial resources and manpower. Therefore, the provision of financial incentives to encourage and assist aliens illegally in the country to deport from the United States has the potential to save tremendous taxpayer resources while restoring the sovereignty of our country. As president, it is my legal obligation to exercise all tools at my disposal to end this invasion, remove the illegal alien invaders from the United States, and protect the American people. This proclamation establishes Project Homecoming, which will present illegal aliens with a choice: either leave the United States voluntarily with the support and financial assistance of the federal government, or remain and face the consequences. Now, why is it all in caps now? This is like one of his tweets. Now, therefore, I, Donald J. Trump, President of the United States of America, by the authority vested in me by the Constitution in the United States of America, including immigration nationality, hereby proclaim and direct as follows: free return home and CBP home application. In furtherance with the purposes of this proclamation and to facilitate the rapid departure of illegal aliens from the United States, I direct, pursuant to Section 215 of the INA, The Secretary of State and Secretary of Homeland Security, in consultation with the heads of other relevant executive departments and agencies, to create seamless processes for illegal aliens to rapidly depart the United States, including through available technological resources such as the CBP Home application. Any flights provided to illegal aliens voluntarily and permanently departing the United States pursuant to processes established under subsection A of the section shall be funded by the federal government. In furtherance of the purposes of this proclamation and to facilitate the rapid departure of illegal aliens from the United States, I direct, pursuant to the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Homeland Security, to take all appropriate actions to enable the rapid departure of illegal aliens from the United States who currently lack a valid travel document from their countries of citizenship or nationality, or who desire to travel to any other country willing to accept their entry. The Secretary of State and the Secretary of Homeland Security shall create a concierge service whereby any alien illegally present in the United States may arrive at an airport with or without appropriate travel documents, book air travel to permanently relocate to a different country, and claim the exit bonus described in Section 2 of this proclamation upon their successful return. Exit bonus. In furtherance of the purposes of this proclamation and to facilitate the rapid departure of illegal aliens from the United States, the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Homeland Security, in consultation with the heads of all relevant agencies, shall provide financial incentives in the form of an exit bonus for each illegal alien who voluntarily and permanently departs the United States. And permanently. How do they possibly track that? I would imagine that's not that easy to track. Could somebody I'm just imagining somebody coming in, getting the free flight to wherever they want to go, because they said it doesn't have to be back to their home country. It just has to be wherever it would take them. So they come in, get the free flight where they want to go, get the exit bonus, and then just come back at a later date and do the whole thing over again. I feel like there maybe would try and implement some sort of system to prevent people from doing that, but I have no faith that they're going to do anything competently. Penalties for aliens who failed to depart. The Secretary of State and the Secretary of Homeland Security, in consultation with the heads of other relevant agencies, shall conduct a nationwide communications campaign to notify illegal aliens of the availability of cost-free travel to other countries, the exit bonus, and the sweeping consequences for those who choose to remain illegally present, including removal, prosecution, incarceration, and fines as consistent with applicable law for immigration-related crimes, the garnishment of wages, and the confiscation of savings and personal property, including homes and vehicles. No later than 60 days after the date of this proclamation, the Secretary of Homeland Security shall supplement existing enforcement and removal operations by deputizing and contracting with state and local law enforcement officers, former federal officers and personnel within other federal agencies, and other individuals to increase the enforcement and removal operations force for the Department of Homeland Security by no less than 20,000 officers in order to conduct an intensive campaign to remove illegal aliens who have failed to deport voluntarily. I'm not reading that last little bit. So I think this is actually what I was talking about. This is the same order that doubles the ICE force. So I guess it was 20,000 before, and they're doubling it to 40,000. I think this is the same thing that was referenced before. So this is just completely unhinged. All of the reasoning given is completely illogical and devoid from reality. None of this should be surprising, but it's this does not this is just, I don't know, there's so many problems with this. um there's so many problems with this. Illegal aliens in the United States is good for us for the most part. Okay, there is a threshold in which it would be too much. There is an ideal number of immigrants, and as well as an ideal number of illegal immigrants, if we're going to be economically objective about this. My understanding is that every economic demographic in the United States benefits from the presence of illegal immigrants up to a certain threshold. Besides one, there's a single group of Americans, that economic group, that does not benefit from the presence of illegal immigrants, and that is those without a high school degree or a GED. So high school dropouts who are competing for the same jobs as those, illegal immigrants who don't have a GED or a high school degree either, Those are the only people that show any sort of economic negative consequence from the presence of illegal aliens. Every other economic group, as far as I understand it, tangibly, statistically, economically benefits from their presence. And it makes sense, right? Anybody working any job that isn't on the very, very bottom of the higher our social hierarchy benefits because most of these illegal aliens coming in fill in that bottom rung, and it necessarily expands the need for everything above them, right? If there's these people requiring these services, it requires more services for the layer above them, and it requires more services from the layer above them, and yada yada yada. It grows the economy in an outward manner that benefits almost everybody. And so the idea that we want to kick out all the illegals is really stupid. Um, and to the extent that you have a problem with them, and so the argument that they're here legally and they committed a crime to be here, and that is a problem. To the extent that that is the case, you could try and nationalize these people, right? If you're somebody who acknowledges the economic benefits of them, but says they committed a crime and therefore they should receive the punishment or they should have come in the right way, you don't have to kick them out. You know that, right? You could just like create a path to citizenship so that they don't have that problem that you're talking about where they've committed a crime or whatever, to cross the border or to lie on their asylum seeking status or whatever. I wish a court could review this, sort of like the other thing we covered earlier, the trans-military ban, where the judge was basically saying like, you guys aren't presenting any reasoning, so we should not defer to you. And on top of that, for this issue, I don't think there could be any good reasoning. I wish there was a judge like that would come and smack this around, give this a little because this is just so stupid. And like, if it was held to any standard like that, that would be the case, right? There's no logical reasoning in this anywhere. It's completely devoid. I saw that there was some overtime tax bill. So during the campaign for the 2024 election, the Trump administration or the Trump campaign came out and talked about removing the taxes for overtime work. Um, and as far as I understand, the Harris administration came on and said, okay, yeah, I guess we're sort of on board with that too. It's one of those issues where on the surface, it seems like a good idea and like, oh, it seems like almost like a no-brainer. Like, why wouldn't we do something like that? But then when you start to think about it a bit more, I think it can become a problem. And where I've heard it described as a problem is that some ways that this bill is written, it doesn't like this bill doesn't narrow in on those working hourly jobs, right? So like when you think of overtime taxes on overtime, you're envisioning like a janitor or a waitress or somebody who's doing like a low level, low paying, like hard job. And that they are, they're only getting 1.5 times their regular pay, and that, it would be nice if they could take home more of that. All of that is completely true. But my understanding is that some of the ways that these bills are written, it does not just include overtime hours after the 40-hour threshold for hourly employees, but it can also apply to salaried employees. Now, I don't think that's necessarily a problem, right? Salaried employees can have overtime too, and I don't think they should be any less eligible for this than an hourly employee. But then I think it also applies to bonuses and things of that nature. And that's where I think it starts to get really problematic because it turns this bill from one that is directed towards the common man, towards the working class people, and it creates it so that the real bulk of the benefit goes towards like executives and CEOs that are receiving huge bonuses from their companies and won't have to pay any taxes on them. Right? It's nice if Joe Schmo working at the airport gets to keep home an extra $100 a month because his overtime pay isn't being taxed and they're shorthanded and he's having to work overtime multiple times a week. That's really nice. Okay, absolutely, and nobody would argue against that, or any reasonable person would argue against that. But if that also means that the CEOs who are receiving a $20 million bonus for basically tanking their company or, for just existing basically, are now that isn't eligible to be taxed, I think that you would have to do the trade-off, right? That's a bad thing. That's definitely a bad thing. And so because that's tax money that should be going into the tax base but isn't, and is going into the pocket of a rich person who ostensibly doesn't need it. And so these things have to be weighed against each other, right? It's sort of like if you have a bill that on one hand feeds a poor child and on the other hand murders three poor children, it's probably not like it's not a good trade-off, right? Yeah, there's one good aspect of it and there's one bad aspect of it, but the bad aspect significantly outweighs the good aspect. And so it would be really stupid to do that. I have a feeling that the same dynamic is occurring here with this overtime tax bill. I'm hoping that this article gives me some more detail on the boundaries of this bill, because if this bill is specifically targeted at those who are hourly based wage employees, all for it. And even if it's expanded to salaried employees, I'm all for it. But as soon as it starts to go into the bonus territory and we don't put some sort of cap on that bonus, I think that could be really problematic and also morally problematic, practically and morally. The proposed no tax on overtime policy has sparked widespread interest among American workers, particularly those pulling double shifts, from nurses to factory workers clocking extra hours. The proposal to eliminate federal taxes on overtime pay promises to put more money in the pockets of hourly employees. But when does no tax on overtime start, and what does the bill pass date mean for you? Below, we answer every question about the overtime tax exemption bill, its current status, and its implications, including state-level developments and potential challenges. The proposed no tax on overtime bill is more than just a policy update. It serves as a potential lifeline for millions of Americans grinding through extra hours to make ends meet. As Congress debates, workers and employers alike await clarity on what does no tax on overtime start and how the date will reshape paychecks and American workplaces. The no tax on overtime bill aims to exempt overtime pay from federal income tax. Under the Fair Labor Standards Act, non-exempt workers earn at least 1.5 times their regular hourly rate for hours worked beyond 40 per week. As of today, this overtime pay is taxed like regular wages, subject to federal income tax, Social Security, and Medicare taxes. The overtime tax proposal, which is part of a broader $4.5 trillion tax cut package, aims to remove the federal income tax portion. This move will allow workers to keep more of their hard-earned overtime earnings. Payroll taxes, such as Social Security and Medicare, would likely still apply. Yeah, so that's what I was just about to say, is where this would become a really, really, really serious problem, I think, is if it took away from, if you were exempt from having to pay the Social Security payroll tax. You should, even if they were to implement this rule, they should absolutely still require that income to be captured by the Social Security payroll tax. Um, we already have a serious problem where we're supposed to be over 90% of all income in the United States is supposed to be captured by the payroll tax. Right now, we're somewhere in the mid 80 percentile. And the delta between what it should be and what it is now is the difference between the solvency of the trust fund, the Social Security trust fund. And so it would be really problematic to implement this overtime tax bill and to exempt it from the Social Security tax, because then that's another couple percentage you can lop off of uh, the total income tax base that is captured by Social Security payroll tax. Another couple percentage would be lopped off, and then we'd be even further into the problem of the solvency of the trust fund. As of May 6th, 2025, the no tax on overtime start date has not yet been finalized. The proposal is still under review in Congress as part of a broader fiscal package tied to the 2025-2026 federal budget. If passed, the federal overtime tax exemption policy could take effect at the start of the new fiscal year, i.e., October 1st, 2025. The bill's final confirmation entirely depends on bipartisan agreement on the broader spending bill. Key updates on the current status of the tax exemption bill are expected over the summer legislative session. The overtime tax exemption would eliminate federal income taxes on overtime wages. In its current form, the proposal aims to increase take-home pay for hourly workers by exempting earnings beyond 40 hours per week from federal income tax. The overtime tax proposal does not affect Social Security or Medicare contributions, which will still be withheld. Good. Important. A specific bill, the Overtime Pay Tax Relief Act, introduced in January 2025 by Representative Don Bacon, proposes a partial deduction for overtime pay. However, the no tax on overtime bill status is currently classified as under consideration in both the House Ways and Means Committee and the Senate Finance Committee. The Senate version of the bill exists. No Senate version of the bill exists yet, which adds further uncertainty of the overtime tax legislation's timeline. Proponents of the bill argue it will stimulate productivity and offer major relief in an inflationary environment. However, critics warn it may end up straining $20 trillion out of federal revenues in the long term. Yeah, I mean, put aside, it would be really, really problematic if Social Security and Medicare taxes were exempt from this. But it is also still a bit less so, but also still problematic that this pulls from the general tax base. And if it is correct that it will, I wonder what it means by long term, because $20 trillion is a lot, and long term can mean a whole lot of different stuff. So if it means like over 1,000 years or 100 years or something, I don't really know what that means. But that is a very significant amount, and I would be fascinated to see what they mean by long term specifically. A final vote on the no tax on overtime policy is anticipated before the end of Q3 2025. For ongoing developments, refer to the Overtime Tax Relief Bill Update section of your state representative's website. All states with a state income tax, except Alabama, currently tax overtime pay as regular income unless new legislation passes. This includes high tax states like California, New York, and New Jersey, where workers face both federal and state taxes on overtime earnings. For instance, in Connecticut, state employees earned $305.4 million in overtime in recent years, all subject to state income tax. Proposed bills in states like Connecticut and Illinois could change this. However, as of May 2025, only Alabama offers relief. Check with your state's Department of Revenue for specifics on income tax policies. As of now, no state has independently passed a bill to align with the federal exemption, although some may follow suit if the national bill is enacted. You'll find the list of states with no tax on overtime below. Even though on the surface and in some practical ways, this is a pro-worker, pro-working class type of policy, I would argue that at its core, this is an inherently pro-business owner, pro-status quo policy, because it further incentivizes people to work overtime. Low income, low on the social ladder who are earning an hourly based wage encourages them. And who disproportionately benefits from straining workers to do overtime? It's employers. Instead of having to pay for getting a new employee is expensive, right? Say you have a shortage of hours and you either have the option to go out and spend all the money it takes to search, train, hire, and onboard and yada yada yada. All it takes for a new employee. Oftentimes, those costs outweigh what it would be to just pay the 1.5 times overtime rate to your current employees and just strain them and ask or force them to work more hours. 40 hours is already a lot in the year 2025. I already think people should not have to work that much. And so this only further incentivizes people to be working beyond what I would hope people what I wish people would need to work in 2025, as well as it kind of strengthens the business owner's perspective and strengthens that dynamic where I said where it may be cheaper to just strain your employees and have them work more overtime than it is to actually go through the effort and cost and whatnot to hire an employee to fill in the gaps. It makes it so when you're an employer and you're in that scenario and you're choosing between hiring another employee and filling the gaps or squeezing your current employees with overtime, it's going to make you want to lean this ruling would make you want to lean more towards the overtime one. You're going to be less inclined to hire and properly do it the proper way and have your employees work a reasonable amount of hours. That's something I can't escape when I think about this policy. A few states have taken the lead on overtime tax exemption. As of May 5th, 2025, Alabama is the only state with an active overtime tax exemption. It came into effect on January 1st, 2024 under House Bill 217 and Act 2024-437. This policy exempts overtime pay from state income tax for full-time hourly workers exceeding 40 hours per week. The move has increased labor supply and personal earnings by roughly 5%. This exemption is set to expire on June 20th, 2025, unless it is extended. Oh, and as this article points out correctly, obviously states like Alaska, Florida, Nevada, New Hampshire, South Dakota, Tennessee, Texas, Washington, and Wyoming are states without official state income taxes. And because of that, this would not apply to them because their overtime pay is already not taxed by a state income tax. The no tax on overtime bill's effective date depends on when Congress passes and the president signs the bill. If approved by mid 2025, the exemption could start as early as July 1st, 2025 for the fiscal year. A more likely scenario, given legislative delays, is January 1st, 2026, and aligning with the tax year. Even if signed into law, payroll systems may need to adjust, so workers might not see changes in paychecks until early 2026. For American workers, the no tax on overtime start date could mean significantly higher take home pay. An hourly worker earning $20 per hour would see their overtime rate of $30 per hour taxed only Social Security and Medicare, and thus increasing net earnings. This policy may end up incentivizing more overtime, especially for frontline workers such as firefighters, nurses, and retail staff. As for employers, the no tax on overtime policy arrives as a double-edged sword. Tax-free overtime may reduce hiring needs by encouraging existing staff to work extra hours. However, this could also strain budgets if demand for overtime increases. How could it strain budget? You're a business owner. Your whole job is to weigh the benefits and costs between the two options, between straining your current employees through overtime or hiring more to fill in the gaps that exist. Um, However, this could also strain budgets if demand for overtime increases. This could also strain budgets. If it strains the budget, that's because you've done something wrong. You've fucked up as a business owner. Like that's not no. No, it's not a double-edged sword. It's a single-edged sword. This is only a good thing for them. What do you mean it's a double-edged sword? You're trying to sound objective here, but it's not. It's just stupid. It's a single-edged sword, not double. Be very clear about that. Tax policy on overtime represents a single shift in how compensation is treated under federal tax law. Unlike tax credits or deductions, this proposal aims to change with the withholding structure. It would provide workers more in each paycheck rather than waiting for tax refunds. The bill also raises questions about fairness and implementation. Would salaried workers eventually be included? What about those with multiple jobs? Yeah, it's a good point. Salaried people, I would think, are no less deserving of this. All right. My laptop battery died mid-article, so let's finish this one midnight style. These discussions are ongoing. There are several pros and cons of the no tax on overtime bill. You'll find a detailed list for each below. Pros of the no tax overtime bill: worker benefits, more take-home pay for hourly workers. This would reward hard work and boost disposable income. By a really small amount, I guess, sure. Economic stimulus, increased worker spending could drive demand for goods and services and thus support local economies. What they're not accounting for in this economic stimulus pro part of the argument is the money that it takes away from the government's the general tax pool, and to the extent that the government's policies are economically stimulus, right? Some of these government policies, some of those tax dollars being spent would be spent on programs that are necessarily economically stimulant. So it doesn't really make sense that you're going to argue that putting more money in the pockets of these workers is economically stimulant when the alternative is just as potentially more economically stimulant as putting the money back in the workers' pockets. So it's a weird argument. I don't feel like the economic stimulus pro of this really is even a pro. It's just a nothing. It's just describing reality. And labor market flexibility. Employers may attract and retain workers more easily, especially in labor shortage industries. I don't even know. I don't like how they've worded this labor market flexibility pro. Employers may attract and retain workers more easily, especially in labor shortage industries. No, I feel like they're going to utilize their current workers more by what I described earlier, by leaning more towards using overtime pay as a way to fill in the gaps as opposed to hiring, training, onboarding a whole new employee. attract and retain workers more easily just because you're offering them more money. I feel like that's a sign of desperation more than anything, right? And cons of the no tax on overtime bill. Revenue loss. According to the Tax Foundation, a federal exemption could reduce revenue by $680 billion to $1.5 trillion over a decade. This may end up straining Social Security and Medicare. Yeah, if it's really that much. So wait, $680 billion over a decade. So that would be 68. Wait, that would be $680 million a year. Are they saying this could lose us between 680 and $1.5 billion a year? That seems So wait, is all of that really worth putting an extra 2% or 3% or whatever the percentage would be extra money in the pockets of working class people? Is it really worth cutting the tax base by that much? I would really question that. Tax fairness, salaried workers, often ineligible for overtime pay, may feel disadvantaged. High earners could exploit loopholes, which may end up reclassifying pay as overtime. Yeah, this is probably where my biggest problem with all of it is I worry how they're going to word this bill, and that some wordings of some of the bills I've seen include like bonuses, and that really it's a big boondoggle for the CEOs to get their bonuses and whatnot and their golden parachutes to be tax exempt. And complexity. The policy could complicate tax codes. If that happens, it may end up increasing compliance costs for employers and the IRS. The no tax on overtime bill status is plagued by controversies. Supporters argue it rewards hardworking Americans and incentivizes labor in a tight market. Critics like the Economic Policy Institute warn that it could encourage excessive hours, harm worker health, and exacerbate inequalities for those unable to work overtime due to caregiving or health constraints. The Tax Foundation argues that workers may favor overtime eligible jobs over salaried roles, which may potentially distort labor markets. Furthermore, the significant revenue loss raises concerns about funding for social programs such as Medicaid. All of those, this is the most salient, important paragraph of this entire article. I'm going to reread this whole thing because it's so important. The no tax on overtime bill status is plagued by controversies. Supporters argue it rewards hardworking Americans and incentivizes labor in a tight market. Critics like the Economic Policy Institute warn that it could encourage excessive hours, harm worker health, and exacerbate inequalities for those unable to work overtime due to caregiving or health constraints. So those are two issues I talked about earlier, that it could harm workers by, instead of doing the proper thing as an employer and filling in the gaps with a new employee, you're going to strain your current workers by forcing or strong arming them into doing overtime. That's a problem. There's a worker health problem. But then, as something I didn't even talk about, and this is very true, is the inequality aspect to this. Is a mother who's working full time but doesn't have the ability to go past 40 hours less deserving of that bit extra money that you're going to put in your pocket than the single guy who's able to do 55 hours and is able to say yes to the extra 15 hours a week of overtime pay their employer is asking of them? Is that mother is contributing to the business in the time that she's there theoretically just as much as the guy is. And so in that sense, she should theoretically, you know, any bonus that this guy receives due to us changing legislation and the way that taxes are done, she should be eligible to a similar benefit. I mean, if we're going to be fair about all of this. The Tax Foundation argues that workers may favor overtime eligible jobs over salaried roles, which may potentially distort labor markets. Furthermore, the significant revenue loss raises concerns about funding for social programs such as Medicaid. This is 100% right. That I wonder to what extent, because like, how much does this actually change the salary equation, right? If you would have made $70,000 a year working overtime without this bill, doing an extra, say, 5 hours a week of overtime for your employer every week, how much extra are you going to get in your pocket, like over the whole year as a result of doing this? I would imagine it's pretty small, and I would imagine unless you're doing a whole lot of overtime, that the effect that this is going to have is almost insignificant. So yeah, the article, strangely written article, but it does address some of the real concerns about this. and that I don't think this is a clear black and white issue, that this is a clearly good, obviously correct thing, and that anybody who would be against this bill or something similar to it is acting in bad faith or whatever. I think how this is implemented is extremely important, as well as it not being a clear black and white, obvious good thing. There are some potential negatives to this. There are some explicit negatives to this, like pulling from the general tax pool. And then there are potential negatives to this, like pulling from Social Security or Medicare, or allowing CEOs to have their bonuses exempt. All of these, depending on how the bill is written, could potentially be problems with it. Alrighty, y'all. Well, it has been May 12th, 2025. I guess I'm finishing it May 13th, 2025. I am Michael Winkler, and this has been The Mike Wink Show.